Now, just so I get it on tape, your first and last name?
Alex Melovidoff.
And the spelling of the last name, just so I have it on tape.
Melovidoff.
And I'll bet you that gets butchered quite often.
Very often.
You can tell when the telemarketers are calling.
Yes.
Can I speak to Mr.
Yes.
Yeah, let's put it this way. If they ever ask for Mr. at my house, I know it's a telemarketer calling. So, where did that? What nationality is this?
It's Russian.
Russian.
Yes.
Yeah. So where did you grow up?
Here in Tacoma.
Oh, really?
Not here in Tacoma.
Well,
in Tacoma, yes.
So had your family been around quite a while? Your parents, or how did you end up in?
Well, I have to go back a little ways. My great-grandfather came over from Moscow, settled in Alaska in 1815. And as a result, produced a large Melovidoff family in Alaska, half of whom now are half-Aleut. Half-Aleut because of the fur seals. And my grandfather was born in Sitka. My great-grandfather was born in Sitka, and my father was born in St. Paul Island in the Pribilofs in 1895. My grandfather was born on the same day the American flag was raised in Alaska and automatically became a citizen. All of the rest of the Russians were up there prior to 1865. Were Russian citizens.
Huh.
Yeah, and so my father and my grandfather brought the family down from St. Paul Island in 1912 and settled in in Sebastopol, California. No, I have to, Petaluma. If you know where Petaluma is.
I've heard the name before.
It's north of San Francisco.
Okay, yeah.
In the apple country up there.
Little change of pace from Alaska.
Very, very much so, yes. My father was a professional musician and was on the old Orpheum circuit and the vaudeville days, and also played in the movies in Hollywood at one time. And he became a music teacher and settled in Tacoma where he was teaching. And we moved up from Oregon from there into Tacoma. And I went to junior high school and high school in Tacoma.
Which high school?
I went to Stadium High School.
That's what I assumed.
Yes.
Huh. That's a beautiful old school.
Yes, they are going to close it down here this next year and refurbish it. And they will take 2 years to redo the interior through the Historical Preservation Society, I think, along with some government help. But it's a fine old school, and it would be tragic to have them tear it down because the architecture is very unique.
And it's such a part of Tacoma.
Yes.
I can't think of anybody that, if you don't know of one thing in Tacoma, Stadium High School, the beautiful architecture, the history that goes behind it, everybody's different theory on how it came to be, the stories.
Yeah.
So what class did you graduate
In
from?
1942.
So you were at Stadium High or in high school when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
That's right, yes.
Do you remember where you were?
Oh, yes.
Hearing about it? What was that like?
We were at home on Sunday having family dinner. My sister and my brother-in-law, who was in the Navy at the time, were down from Seattle. And we were all around the dining room table when the news came. And immediately following the news, there was a report from the newscast that all military personnel were to return to their bases. So my brother-in-law, who was in the Navy, suddenly had to leave, and he and my sister went back to Seattle, and he joined his unit in Seattle with the Navy. So we were quite aware of what was going on at the time.
I was going to say that's interesting because a lot of people that were in high school, they knew something bad had happened, but other than that, they didn't know that much.
Mm-hmm.
But having somebody that was in the Navy, I assume your brother-in-law understood the
Oh yes,
severity of.
yes. He left immediately after hearing on the radio that all military personnel were to return.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted.
Did you make that decision right away or?
Well, at the time I was 17, and in order to enlist, they wouldn't take us until we were 18. So it wasn't until a year later, a month and a half after my 18th birthday, I enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps in December of 1943. And had to wait around because they were unable to take all of the enlistees at the time. I think I enlisted on December the 15th of 43, just 1 year, no, 42, 1942. It was right after my 18th birthday. And I started my progress as an enlistment in November, but due to having to take various tests for the Air Corps, physical exams and whatnot, it wasn't until December the 15th that I actually raised my hand and enlisted.
Where did you do that at?
In Seattle.
In Seattle.
Yeah.
Was that a group thing? Or?
Yeah, it was a group. 4 of us went there to enlist together. But I was the only one who made it through all of the tests and all of the physicals.
Is it like I've seen, I mean, everybody jokes about the physical and all that. Is it like the stereotype that they say of the military, where they just started feeding all these guys through like a line and poking you and prodding you? And
That came later, but at the enlistment time, there were just a few people there, and the ordeal wasn't that bad. They just wanted to see if you were alive. No, the other physicals came later, which were quite extensive.
What type of test did they want to see if you qualified?
You had to take an intelligence test for your math and your English, and prior to my enlisting, the requirements to enter the Army Air Corps, you had to have 2 years of college. But things were getting to the point where they were not getting the number of enlistees they needed. So they lowered the requirements. So in lieu of the 2 years of college, they gave you a test. Of course, I was attending UPS or CPS at the time, College of Puget Sound at the time. So I'd had a little bit of college. And their tests including, all types of intellectual type tests.
Looking back, do you think it was a very tough test, or they just kind of, they needed flyers and let's make it somewhat easy for you to get in, or was it tough?
I thought it was fairly tough. I didn't think I'd pass, actually, because my math wasn't exactly the best. So I was keeping my fingers crossed. But I wasn't called to active duty until February of 43 and was sent to Lincoln Army Air Base in Lincoln, Nebraska in February of 43 for basic training.
Now, when you enlisted, did you have a pretty good idea? I mean, had you seen enough newsreels and things to know that we really are at a war? And I mean, what was your mindset at this point? Here's a 17, 18-year-old kid. What are you thinking of enlisting?
Well, I had wanted to fly ever since I was quite small. And so I had a particular interest in aviation. But as I said before, I couldn't enlist prior to my 18th birthday. I tried when I was 17, but they wouldn't take me. Now, the Marine Corps, you can enlist at 17 with your parents' permission. But the Army had no such provision. You had to be, especially in the Air Corps, you had to be at least 18. So shortly after my 18th birthday in 1942, which was in October, I started processing my enlistment.
Now, did you have you had a sister, because she was married?
Yes.
To the brothers?
No.
So you were the only boy?
Yes.
What did mom think about, or mom and dad think about you signing up for the...
Of course, my father had been in the Navy in World War I. I had an uncle who had been in the Navy in World War I, so it was almost taken for granted that I would join the Navy. But I had no desire to be in the Navy because I couldn't swim very well.
Good choice.
So, but I was really interested in aviation.
So what was Lincoln, Nebraska like?
Cold. It was February of 1943, and Nebraska is very flat, and the wind blows across the prairie, and the barracks were heated by a small coal stove, and there were quite a number of people who were there, all from the West Coast. They had taken a train. I had taken a train from Seattle, where we had all been directed to go. And on our way back to Nebraska, we stopped at various places along the way and picked up another contingent of enlistees. So that by the time we reached Lincoln, Nebraska, in the Army airfield there was a trainload of Air Corps enlistees from California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, all the way across. And some of the Californians were in typical California dress, and they were suffering because they didn't have the proper clothes, and they had so many there that they had run out of uniforms. So we were doing close order drill, and the poor Californians were out there in their summer clothes and in their light shoes, tramping around in the snow. Fortunately, I was able to get a uniform and a large Army overcoat.
Now, is this, as you're getting on the train and you're collecting all these enlistees as you go along, is this just one big party on the train at this point? I mean, everybody's pretty jacked up about what's going on? And
yes, but I wouldn't say there was much of a party going on. Most of the guys were pretty serious.
Do you remember conversations, what people talked about on the train? Or
no, I really don't.
They were just a lot of guys in uniform.
Yeah, no, we were all in civilian clothes.
Still civilian, but
yeah, not until we got to Lincoln, where we issued a uniform.
Huh.
And our basic training was not very long, because all of the enlistees who were sent to Lincoln were then transferred to the various colleges, college training detachments throughout the Middle West. I was assigned to Iowa State Teachers College at Cedar Falls, Iowa. Others were sent to Coe College in another part of Iowa. Others were in Nebraska. At that time, the Air Corps were stockpiling enlistees for the Air Corps, and they couldn't take all of them because of the training requirements. And they didn't want the rest of the Army to get a hold of these enlistees. So they set up these college training detachments where we were sent to various small colleges throughout the Middle West, where we were actually given college courses such as physics, math, meteorology, geography, anything that was, enabled us to get a little advantage in as far as education was concerned, besides physical education.
But no hands-on flight training at this point?
No, we were introduced to flying at the local airport with about 5 hours of in a Piper Cub, and that was our only experience of flying at that time. We didn't take any flying until later on.
Now, are the guys getting frustrated because you went there to fly?
Yes.
And now they're got you in college?
Yes.
Was it frustrating?
Oh, yes, it was. Everybody was quite eager to continue and advance.
So how long did you stay?
At Iowa State Teacher College? Maybe a month and a half, 2 months.
Not too bad.
No, it wasn't. In fact, it was very delightful. Because it was almost like it was being in college, but only in uniform. Then we were all sent to Santa Ana Air Base in Santa Ana, California for classification. This is where the physical exams became much more stringent. The other exams were not only physical but mental. You had to go visit with a psychiatrist. You were given all kinds of tests, eye tests, hearing tests. You had to make sure that you were not colorblind. And this is where they determined whether you were going to be a pilot, a bombardier, or a navigator. And so this was a classification system which the Air Corps had set up at the time. And besides all of these tests, we were given, close order drill, calisthenics, a lot of physical tests that you had to go through, and that was kind of tough on a lot of guys because you had to do so many sit-ups, you had to do so many other physical activities in order to pass.
So what was your classification?
I was finally classified as a pilot. The brainy ones were made navigators.
That must have been pretty exciting.
It was, yes.
So,
and pretty stringent because this is where we really got military activity. The typical drill sergeant, etc., that type of training. We were also having to take tests in a swimming pool. You had to see whether you could swim. You were put in an enclosure like an airplane cockpit, sent down into the pool, strapped to this makeshift cockpit. You had to get out, take your pants off, make a sort of, I guess you'd call it a life-saving device. You took your pants, tied up the ends, and then went like this to fill it with air, and then use that as a life-saving thing. So you had to take that drill. You were taken out to the rifle range, see if you could shoot a rifle, the pistol range, and they exposed you to shooting clay pigeons. So it was quite an experience.
how did you do in the water part? Because you said you're not a big swimmer.
Well, I just barely made it. I passed the minimum. And after we finished all the classification, then most of us were sent off to the various flight schools, or bombardier school, or navigator school. And I was sent to Oxnard, California for for primary flight training.
What plane did they start you on? Were you still flying small ones at that time?
I was flying a Stearman, which was basically a Boeing product, a single engine, twin, double winged. And I went to what they called the Miraloma Flight Academy, which was at the time, prior to the war, was a private flight school. And they had turned it into a military. And I had a civilian instructor. In fact, all of the instructors were actually civilians. And we started to fly on the Stearman. And I soloed in 10 hours, which was average. It was a very exciting day when we were up. The instructor, we went back to the airfield and he parked the plane, got out, left it running. He says, "Okay, you're it." And I was given an opportunity to show my first training of flying alone, taking it up and bringing it down in the landing by myself, which was rather exciting. But after that, most of our training was with an instructor until later on we were flying by ourselves.
Did they lose many pilots in training?
They lost a few, yes. Some of the boys who were in flight training were just not coordinated enough to be able to handle. It wasn't that they weren't smart enough, but it takes a certain amount of coordination. And it was up to the instructor to determine whether an individual would finally, be able to. And this happened all the way through the training period. When we left Oxnard, our class was sent to Chico, California, which is up in the northern San Joaquin Valley, north of Sacramento. Mm-hmm. And we trained in a BT, what they call a BT-13, which is a low-winged monoplane, bigger engine, had radios in them, and we started to train in those. Here again, we were given, this was an actual Army installation, and we had Army instructors.
Single person plane, or are they bigger?
Yeah, no, they were a twin person, two places,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where we learned radio procedures, and we began to fly in formation, cross-country flights, and night flying. That was an interesting experience. Going up at night with an instructor, and then after that having to go up by yourself. You had to make sure that you oriented yourself because it gets pretty dark. Yeah.
You ever get lost?
No, that came later.
Oh, yeah.
We finished our training in Chico, and the weather was so bad that they split the class up and sent half of them to Victorville, California, which was down in the desert country. I stayed in Chico, and we actually finished our training before those who went to Victorville, because they ran into some difficulty with weather down there, and they didn't quite finish at the same time we did. I graduated from there and went to Stockton, California for twin engine training. We flew what was normally called the, if I can remember now, the Bamboo Bomber. It was a twin engine, fabric covered wings, and the body was also fabric covered. But this was a side-by-side twin-engine airplane. And we went with an instructor at first. And after that, you always flew with another cadet, because you both had to fly both the right-hand and the left-hand seats on that to prepare you for multi-engine flying. And when we finished training there, I got my wings. Went to the largest class at that time to go through Stockton. And from there, we were all assigned to various bases throughout. I was assigned to Las Vegas Army Airfield to fly a B-17. I was taking co-pilot training on a B-17. And Las Vegas, if you can imagine, sending a young 19-year-old second lieutenant in that den of iniquity. I learned quite a bit there. I lost a lot of money there, too. I learned that you don't gamble anymore. And then part of our training was to go out into the desert. Our training was basically to train aerial gunners. While they were training co-pilots, they were also training aerial gunners. So we would go out into the desert, and we'd go up to several thousand feet, and there would be a tow plane towing a target, and the gunners then would have the experience of trying to hit this target that was towed by another airplane. And they could tell they had colored the ammunition blue, red, or green. They dipped them in the paint. So when they brought the target in, and it was a cloth target, I think it must have been about 6 or 8 feet long, they could tell who was doing the shooting because of the color of the bullet holes in the target.
Now, is this? I've heard people talk about it before, but I never asked. Is this towed way behind that? Because I'm thinking, I don't want to be the pilot towing a target with some amateur gunners up there firing away.
Nobody did, and so no, it was the airplane that was towing the target was quite a far ahead of the airplane. And of course, the student gunners were told very, very definitely that they were not to shoot at the airplane; they were to shoot at the target. And all the time I was there, I don't think anybody actually hit the airplanes that were towing the targets.
So at this point, how many hours roughly have you had in a plane? How much flight time?
Oh, I should remember.
I mean, are they pumping you up?
Yeah, we spent basically 6 weeks at each phase, flying mostly every day, 4 hours. Of course, you had ground school at the same time. You'd fly in the morning and have ground school in the afternoon. And the rest of the class, when you were in ground school, they would be flying. So you took ground school on engines, aircraft assembly, structures. You had to take radio work, the did type of things. And basically so that you had, and also in advanced training, you took training in a link trainer, which was to help you navigate by radio. So all of your time was taken up either with flying or going to ground school. All of this took a good portion of your day.
Because you have a lot of information being
Yes. And at night in the barracks, you'd have to take your books and do some studying. So when I finished advanced training and went to Las Vegas, after there, I went up to Lemoore, California, which was in Sacramento Valley, for assignment to a combat crew. And I was sent to Walla Walla Air Force Base to fly a B-24, and I had never seen a B-24 up to that point. Here I had over 35 hours of flight training in a 17, and knew all about the 17, all of the instruments, all of the settings on the engines, and how to the various parts of the aircraft. And they put me down in the Walla Walla, and I looked out on the airfield and I says, "What's that?" The B-24 is the one with the twin tails, 10-man crew, and I was assigned to a combat crew at Walla Walla. We went through combat training at that time with the crew, which was bomb runs, high altitude flying, navigation, night training. That's where we got lost. The first time I went up with a pilot and an instructor from the base on a night training. There were just three of us. There was the engineer, I was a co-pilot, our pilot, and an instructor from the base. And we were flying around out of Walla Walla up through the north, around Spokane and Coolidge and whatnot in the dark, and we got lost. So we had to radio the base and ask them to give us they took a reading on our transmission on the radio and gave us a direction to get back to the base, which was very embarrassing.
I would assume you took just a little bit of razzing for that.
Yes, we did. And then as I said, we had a 10-man crew.
Was there a certain way of picking that crew? Or were you just assigned a crew?
We were just assigned to a crew, yes.
So they didn't look and say, these people are good in this, they just kind of counted off? And
that's more or less the way it went, yeah.
Do you remember who your was this the crew you were with?
Yes, that was the crew we went overseas with.
So who were some of the people that were in your crew?
Our pilot was from Oklahoma. He was 24. The oldest member of our crew was our tail gunner. No, nose gunner, he was 27. And there was only one younger person than myself, and that was the navigator. He was 4 months younger than I was. But he and I were the youngest on the crew. All the rest of them, the ball turret gunner, the tail gunner, the radio operator, the engineer who was the top turret gunner, and our bombardier, and the two waist gunners were all fellows who were older than either the navigator or myself. So we felt rather, here we were, 19-year-old second lieutenant. As co-pilot, I was second in command, even though there were older people there. And
did the crew? Does the crew bunk together? I mean, are you together?
No, only the officers.
Only the officers.
And
So
the
you
crew,
work
the
together
enlisted men. The enlisted men bunked together, yes, but they were not in the same barracks as we were. We were in officers' quarters with other crews. Our navigator was from Madison, Wisconsin. Our bombardier was from Worcester, Mass. Our waist gunner was from Springfield, Vermont. Our radio operator was from Superior, Wisconsin. Our tail gunner was from East St. Louis, Illinois, and our tail gunner was from Texas. So we had quite a spread of people, and I was the only West Coaster from the West Coast on the crew. The other was either from the Midwest or three of them were from New England states.
Was it a brand new plane?
No, it wasn't. They had been at Walla Walla for some time, several months, and so they were not brand new.
Now, is this the plane that you would then take with you, or this was still just being used for training?
Just used for training.
Oh, okay.
After our combat crew training was completed, I might digress a little bit. We did bomb runs over the Borden bomb range over west of in Oregon, the Boardman bombing range along the Columbia River. High altitude, low altitude, all types of training in that respect. Navigational exercises in how to bail out, exercises in what you do with a crash landing. All of that was included in our combat crew training. After we finished that, we were transferred to Hamilton Air Force Base in California, which was a gathering point for combat crews going overseas. Now, of the group that we graduated or finished with in Walla Walla, there were only 2 crews that went to Europe. All the rest of them were assigned to the South Pacific. We picked up a brand new airplane at Hamilton Field, which is north of San Francisco. You know where San Quentin? Hamilton Field is just north of San Quentin.
Okay.
And it was an old field, prior to World War II. The other bases were usually newly formed bases that were put together right after the war. I mean, right before the war, during the war.
During the war, yeah.
Chico, Stockton, Walla Walla were all relatively new Army air bases. But Hamilton Field was something like Fort Lewis, had brick structures and whatnot. So we picked up a brand new airplane there to go to Italy.
What plane?
It was a B-24.
It was another 24.
Another 24.
Did it have I always see a lot of guys have named their planes and all that. Did it have they've got the paintings on them and all that?
No, all we were doing was ferry this airplane to Italy. And our route was from Hamilton Field, California to Amarillo, Texas. Amarillo, Texas to Syracuse, New York. New York to Grenier Field, New Hampshire. New Hampshire to Goose Bay, Labrador. Flew overseas to the Azores, landing there and we hit it right on the button. And from the Azores to Marrakesh in Africa, North Africa, from there into Tunis in Tunisia, and then hopped over from there to deliver our airplane in a base in Italy. From there, we were assigned to a permanent combat group in Italy.
Did the group of 10 stay together?
Yes, we were all together.
So you're still a crew?
We're still a crew.
Okay. And at this point, now you get your plane?
No, that isn't...
That's not how it...
Not how it worked for us. We would get on the base and we would be, at the briefing, would be assigned to an airplane. Now, the first mission, I was left on the ground because they sent an experienced pilot with the crew on their first mission. And so I was left on the ground. The crew's second mission, which was my first, we bombed a railroad bridge in northern Italy, which we didn't do very well. It was still intact after we got through. We were in of course, the whole group went. And on my second mission, we were assigned to go to Munich, Germany, to bomb what we call, which would term the marshalling yards, which were basically the train yards in Munich, where they were gathering all of the trains for distribution throughout. At that time, the Germans were still in northern Italy. And the second mission is where I was shot down.
How did that happen? What was that like for a person who's never been?
Well, we actually were hit by flak, or anti-aircraft fire, going into on what they call the target. We were able to drop our bombs and then turn with the group to head back to Italy. But because one engine was acting up and going out, we were losing altitude. We lost the formation, or fell behind the formation. And gradually, we're losing altitude. At that time, our crew, we were told that we ought to, get rid of all the weight that we could. So we were throwing ammunition out. We were throwing guns out of the airplane. We were taking our flak suits off, which was steel. Throwing those out, doing everything we could to lighten the aircraft so that we could, at least we told the navigator to head us for Yugoslavia, because the partisans there would had assisted a number of downed airmen who had reached Yugoslavia. But we couldn't make it.
Is it a state of panic at this point, or are you so well trained that it's methodical still in what you're doing?
Well, I don't know about the rest of it, but I didn't consider myself panicked, particularly, because we were trained. This is what we were trained to do, and we were getting to the area of the Austrian Alps. And the pilot asked the navigator, how high are the mountains in that area? And he said, well, they're anywhere from 10 to 12,000 feet. We don't have accurate maps to tell us actually. And by that time, we were getting down into the overcast to the point where we couldn't see the ground. And flying over the Alps as we knew, we said, well, we discussed it back and forth between the pilot and myself, that since we didn't know and couldn't see the tops of the mountains, and we were getting down to 11,000 feet, we said, well, maybe we better bail out. So Chet, our pilot, gave the order to bail. And everybody bailed out. Chet was the last one to go. I started to leave through the bomb bay, and the flight engineer refused to go. I tried to push him out, but he wouldn't go. And finally he said he was going to wait for Chet. So I said, fine, I knew Chet would send him out. So I jumped, and he followed shortly afterward. In fact, I think it really was he wanted to see someone else do it. Because the rest of the crew, the nose gunner, bombardier, navigator, all bailed out through the nose wheel door. The rest of the crew went out through the back. And so there were only 3 of us on the flight deck, which was the pilot, co-pilot, and the flight engineer. So he didn't see anybody else leave. So I think this kind of...
You'd only been taught theory to this point.
Yes.
Jumping out of a plane. Now the reality comes to
Yes, yes.
Huh. So now you're not being pursued at this point?
No, we weren't. We never... At that point, we weren't followed by any enemy aircraft.
So you had to let this beautiful airplane
Yes.
go its way.
Right.
You went your way. And was that your first real jump?
It was first and only jump.
First and only jump.
The first one is always the easiest because you don't know what's coming. But I jumped out feet first, got caught in a air slip, and watched the airplane pass over me, and I counted to 3 and pulled the ripcord on the parachute, and it went up over my face, and you get quite a jolt when that thing opens. I had no more gotten out of the clouds than I could see the ground. Now remember, this is in the middle of November, snow-covered mountains. And I wasn't in the air very long. I would say maybe not. I wasn't floating down much more than 5 or 8 or 10 minutes before I hit the ground. And I lit on a mountainside. And in this little mountain village, was in this little valley, houses were just along one side of the road. And I lit on the side of the mountain that overlooked the road. My parachute draped over a tree, and I lit in all of this heavy snow. And I was lucky because I didn't really land very hard. It was a hard landing, but not landing like on hard ground. And I could see all of the people below me who'd come out onto the street. I could see people coming up from the bottom, and I turned around behind me, and there was a person behind me aiming at me with a rifle. So I knew I couldn't escape. Besides, the mountainside was too steep for me to run. So I stayed where I was, and the local police came up and gathered me up. They gathered my parachute, took me down to the road where the local people were all gathered. And they all stared, of course. They hadn't seen much of the war, really, because they were in the Austrian Alps. And the only thing that they knew about the war was the airplanes going over. Now, I lived south of Salzburg, if you're familiar with Austria, which is not too far from Berchtesgaden. And I was fortunate that the civilians picked me up, because there in the mountains, if I had lit anywhere else, I'm sure I would have froze to death. Because the Alps are pretty rugged. They're pretty much like our Cascades here. Only, I would say, a lot more rugged. As we reached the road to head into the little village, someone brushed past me and said, "I'm from Seattle." And by the time I turned around, he was gone. And I have no idea who it was or why he said that, but it struck me as rather odd.
Like a citizen, or?
Yeah, he was a citizen. And but I never heard anything more out of that.
And it just had to be one of those coincidences that you were an American.
Yes.
So it wasn't that they knew you were from this area. They just, wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
I was taken to the local police station, which was a combination of police station, city hall, etc. I was ordered to strip. They take all of my clothes. They went through, first of all, they patted me. First time they reached me, they patted under my arm. Because, yes, I had left my pistol at the base. But I had 2 clips in my flight suit knee pockets. And of course, they found that. They wanted to know where the gun was. I couldn't tell them anything.
Anybody speak English?
No.
So you're getting a bunch of German thrown at you.
Yeah. They're inspecting my flight suit, checking all of the seams, because there were times when they were putting in wire in the seams for, little saw blades. We didn't have any, but that's what they thought we had. So they went through all of the seams, through all of my pockets. They found my escape kit. We were each given an escape kit that had a little bit of food, a map, a silk map, money, matches, all of the things that you would need for an escape. They found that, confiscated it. They took my watch. And by this time, my flight engineer showed up. They had brought him in because he had dropped shortly after I did and had lit not too far from where I had fallen. And they found him, brought him in. They went through the same procedure with him. Fortunately, I had taken a pair of shoes with me because we flew with flight boots that were sheep-lined. Because our target that day, we were flying at 28,000 feet, so it gets pretty cold. But I had put my shoes in a duffel bag behind my seat in the airplane, along with my parachute. So when I grabbed the parachute, I grabbed that duffel bag. I'm thankful that I did, because they took my flight boots away from me. A lot of prisoners at that time lost their flight boots because of the jerking of the parachute. They would fly off. Fortunately, mine stayed on. And those who lost their boots, their flight boots, didn't have any shoes to wear, and they had to walk around in their stocking feet in the snow and on the rough ground. I was lucky that I kept my shoes, so I could, at least walk.
Now, what's going through your mind at this time? Are you still in control of the situation? I mean, it's okay, I lived through the parachute jump, the plane went down, or are you more in the mode of
what's going to happen? It didn't really hit me until there were a couple of Wehrmacht soldiers. They had got on the phone and called somewhere. But within an hour, 2 German soldiers showed up. And when they went, "Heil Hitler," I knew where I was. And that's when it really struck me as, I wasn't, I was amongst the enemy. However, I must say that the civilians there in this little town didn't do anything to harm either me or the flight engineer.
So just the two of you ended
Just
up?
only the two of us.
Everybody else ended up
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Because when you string out, when the airplane is going along, a couple of 100 miles an hour, and you drop out, you're spread out miles, actually, when you go out one at a time.
Yeah, very quickly.
Yeah. You've seen parachute jumps when the airborne troops fall, you know how they are spaced apart. Well, in time, the two soldiers took control, and we took a little bus down the mountainside like this to a railroad station. And we were put on aboard this railroad car, the train. They must have known the schedule because we hadn't been in the station very long when the train came. Soldiers escorted us on the train, and we were taken to Salzburg, which was the closest large city where there was a large contingent of military, into the middle of the town. To their headquarters, actually. And by this time it was nighttime, because our target was at noon, basically. We hit the target about noon. But all of this activity, by the time we got to Salzburg, it was dark. And we were taken to a little shed in what they call the Hof. A lot of German buildings are built around a square. In the center is what they call a Hof, which is an open space. And you enter through basically two entrances to the, but there was a small building in the Hof where we met 4 other airmen who had been taken prisoner at that same day. And there was a pile of rugs there, and we were told to, more or less, this is where you're going to sleep. So we settled in for the night. I was taken before an elderly German officer, and he started asking me questions. And according to my instructions, if I had name, rank, and serial number, that's all we gave. But the typical phrase, and I heard this many times from other prisoners, this elderly German officer told me, he says, "For you, the war is over." And I heard that from many of the prisoners who had received the same message. And we were in Salzburg for several days while they were gathering other prisoners until they could get enough to transport us to other places. During the period of time that we were there, we went through a bombing raid. The 15th Air Force was bombing Salzburg that day. And some of their bombs went astray and hit in the streets and in the various houses around. We were taken to a civilian air raid shelter prior to the raid. By this time, there were about 6 of us. The civilians didn't want us in that air raid shelter at all. The guards who were in charge of us didn't want to stand outside either, because they'd been through some raids before and they knew exactly what would happen. So they were torn between their own safety and taking the wrath of the civilians by bringing us inside the shelter. We wound up standing basically in the entrance of the shelter, going through the raid. And after the raid, we were being marched back to headquarters, and we ran into a bunch of civilians. And there's where we got scared, because they began throwing rocks at us. I recall a little old lady spitting at us. And there was a German army work crew nearby, all lined up in order to start cleaning up the streets, because there was rubble all over the streets. There was one soldier, he was standing there, he had a pick in his hand, resting on the ground. And this civilian woman went over to him and tried to take it away from him. She was going to hit us with that pick, but he wouldn't let go. Later on, we learned from the guards, because they moved us out pretty fast then. We learned later on from the guards that the civilians were looking for some rope. They were going to hang us. So the guards took us out of there very quickly and took us back to the Army headquarters. So that was an experience also.
I never thought about that aspect of it. I mean, I always hear stories of people once they got to the prison camp, but here we've just flown over and blown up their city. Again, here's the enemy, you, here's the civilian. So the civilians actually created more fear than the guards or the military that were watching.
Yes, yes. We had there was a German sergeant in charge of the detail guarding us, and there were 4 guards, plus the sergeant. He'd been wounded on the Russian front and walked with quite a limp, but he was still able to. He was the one who moved us out of there quickly. And we got back to the headquarters of the local army. And by that time, they had picked up several other prisoners around the area from a couple of raids. And we were on our way to Dulag Luft, which was the interrogation center. Now that's up in Frankfurt, so we were taken by bus into Munich with a stopover at a small airfield where the Luftwaffe had a training base. And they were teaching young men how to fly. And of course, they were very interested in us, curious. So they came down. We were in the basement. They came down and, took a look at us. But they were in flight training. We went from there to downtown Munich to the main railway station. And it was a big structure with a big glass dome, which was typical of many railroad stations in Europe, but all of the panes of the...
Let me have you hold that thought for a sec. I got to switch. I think that's always the irony of, you've been doing a little remodeling and now you're...
Amongst it.
Amongst it, yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's not very cold, but it's wet. Well, I can exactly feel how those kids must have felt, because I know how we hated them.
See, that's it. The other side of
Sure. They
which
called
is
Luftgangsters, and I mean, they were the enemy. They bombed us night after night after night after night.
And daytime. The British bombed at night.
Oh, well,
We
daytime
did.
at night.
We
Yeah,
did daylight
yeah,
bombing.
yeah. And so, I mean, gee, of course you wanted to. You know?
Well, now we know how I think some of the Pakis look at us right now. We're remodeling the Afghanis, or remodeling over there, the innocent.
Yeah.
You know, the innocent
Sure.
versus
Yes.
the people that are.
Sure, yeah, and I mean, you know, when Alex talks about stray bombs, I mean, toward the end of the war, there was no such thing as stray bombs. They knowingly bombed the civilians, because we lost our house, we lost everything.
Oh, is that right?
Oh yeah, we were bombed.
Now, which city were you in?
We were living in a smaller town called Rastatt, which is in the southwestern part of Germany, close to the Black Forest, very close to Gockenau, where they used to make the Messerschmitt fighter planes. And so we were, heavy, yeah.
Wow, wow.
So
Her grandfather was a major in the Luftwaffe. Her father was a major in the Wehrmacht.
So it
Her-
was
her
really,
great-grandfather-
it was the enemy. I mean, that's the way it was. We were their enemy and they were our enemy.
That's the
And-
hard.
And I know that civilians were bombed on purpose. I mean,
Now, would you have thrown rocks at them?
at the time, probably.
Yeah, you know, Churchill, toward the end of the war, gave an order that since with the bombing of not only London but Coventry.
Oh yes.
Coventry was destroyed, literally, by German bombers. And Churchill says, forget about this other business. We're going to go in. That's what happened to Leipzig.
Basically said.
All bets are off.
fair game. Yeah, yeah.
And so I have to, and he talked the Americans into the process because actually, as far as the Air Corps was concerned, they said, we do precision bombing. That's all we're after. Well, you can't precision bomb with the equipment that we were using. Bombs do go astray.
Especially, and I'm trying to remember, what elevation were you when you actually, you flew in high and dropped down to drop your bombs, or did you
No,
drop
we
from-
dropped them from 28 to anywhere from 25 to 28,000 feet.
Yeah, so if you're that much off at 25,000 feet and it's got to travel 25,000 feet down, you know,
Yeah, yes,
you're lucky you got it in the right country.
yeah. But Churchill talked the U.S. into changing their method of bombing.
Well, I even remember having those little fighter planes come in, unannounced. They would fly at such low level that they couldn't be detected, and they just go down the main streets in the city where we lived and bang, 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 bang.
Yeah, strafing,
Yeah.
Wow.
Pick up civilians. Kill civilians.
anything that moved.
Yeah. Anything.
That's where war becomes, there is this very, for lack of a better word, but surreal aspect of,
Mhm.
of war and,
Yeah, everybody's affected by it. It's tough. And I feel for those people. I feel those people in Bosnia when that went on, and I feel for those poor Afghanis, and it's hell. And I feel for the Palestinians and because it is hell.
and that's where the one that we talked to said, if people could just get along, that
Yeah.
war
Right?
isn't the answer to.
No, it isn't. And it's not necessary. That's just it. Especially this horrific holy war that we're involved
That's getting more and more holy.
Yeah.
More and
Yeah.
more and more.
Well, anyway, you do good.
Oh, okay.
You seem very relaxed.
Okay, so we're at the train station.
We're at the train station, yes. at the, I forget the word for it now, but it's a huge station. Boarded a train, went up through Germany, up to Frankfurt on the Main River, and then transported by truck, by bus to the interrogation center, where we were confined. I was in solitary confinement for 7 days, which was normal, and during that period of time, interrogated by a German officer. Started out by giving name, rank, and serial number, which didn't get very far. He wanted to know what was our target, where was our base, all that. And it actually wound up, he knew where I was from, he knew the base I was on, he knew our target, and he even showed me a slip of paper from our base in Italy, which was a receipt for a sleeping bag.
Wow.
So they had a very, very good intelligence service. In fact, some of the people I talked to had said that they were shown pictures of their graduation from flight school. They had gleaned from local newspapers that they had subscribed to throughout the U.S. They went into Switzerland, and there were people who did nothing but, in the intelligence section, clip out things that referred to military people, and the pictures of guys getting their wings with their family. And of course, I had been I hadn't been, in the papers that long for them to get anything like that. But they knew where I was from and everything. So I didn't have to tell them anything. They already knew it. But I still stayed 7 days in solitary in a room that was 6 feet wide, 8 feet long. And you count the nails. You have a window, but you can't see through it. You hum songs to yourself, anything to keep yourself occupied. And every once in a while, somebody opens up a little trapdoor and looks in at you. There's a single light bulb in the ceiling, which is turned out at night. And you're in the dark. You got a little cot, and you're given 2 meals a day, and that's it. You sit there and you ponder. you think about what's going on. And as I say, you count the nails in the wall and do all sorts of things just to keep your mind busy.
And there's other people in solitary
Oh,
around.
yeah.
But I
There's
assume you can't yell to them.
No, you can't, because the place basically was soundproofed.
7 days.
Yes. And I know people who were in there 2 weeks.
What do you think you'd go crazy? I mean, your mind would start.
Yeah.
So what's the when they bring you out and start to interrogate you and work with you, what's the attitude? I mean, is it like the movies? We have ways of making you talk, or do they try to buddy with you, or?
No, it's in between.
In between?
You're threatened, yes. But also that they're friendly. They offer you a cigarette, which was great, You haven't had a cigarette in a long time. Because that's one of the first things they took away from you when you landed. But they offer you a cigarette, and when you tell them you ain't going to tell them anything, then they start, telling you, well, I think you better talk, and you say no. And the interrogator speaks fluent English, but he tries to be a little friendly, but still reserved. But there was no business of saying, "Well, we're going to go and take you out and shoot you." I never got that. But I can't speak for the rest of them.
Had the military trained you well for what you were going to face? I mean, did you know pretty much what?
We knew fairly much of what would happen. And so after the interrogation and the time we spent there, we were sent to another compound where we were given all new clothes through the Red Cross, old U.S. Army uniforms, a packet in a plastic suitcase, which I still have, through the Red Cross. It contained toothbrush, toothpaste, comb, razor, soap, washcloth, all of the things that you would need, an extra pair of underwear. But basically all we got was a Army shirt, Army pants, Army socks, an old Army overcoat. And then after that, we were sent to our basic primary camp, which was on the Baltic coast in northern Germany, on the Baltic coast north of Berlin. So we took a railroad train from where we were, clear across, and we went through the Leipzig area, and we were on this train when the British came over. Now the British use what they call a pathfinder. There's an airplane that goes over, spots the target, and drops flares on the target. And then their bombers come in individually and bomb on that flare. Well, here we're locked in this rail car, and the bombs are going off alongside the railroad. We can't get out, and you get kind of scared after a while.
Are you moving?
No, we're not moving. Yeah, the train stops during the raid. And a very odd thing, I sat in Berlin in their big train yard on the 7th of December, 1944. And I thought, well, the Americans are going to celebrate Pearl Harbor by bombing Berlin that day. That's what I thought. I thought, well, they would come over with a big raid on Berlin because that was beginning to be a big target then. But fortunately, they didn't. So we were in the train yard in this train for overnight. And then taking a train then on up to our camp. We were not too far from the German test base for their missiles, a place called Peenemünde, where they were testing the V-bombs and their other missiles. Well, we didn't call them missiles at the time. Rockets, that's right. But it was their rocket test station, and we used to see them go up every once in a while. And we were placed in a place called Stalag 1, which was a base for airmen. Now, there were approximately 8,000 British in that camp and roughly 10,000 Americans. So it was quite a large camp. And we were placed in a barracks that was raised on stilts to keep us from, they finally, after the Great Escape and the tunneling, they put a stop to the tunneling by raising the barracks off the ground on stilts. And at night they would put their dogs inside the compound and let them run through, just in case somebody decided you want to get out. And they had these German shepherds who would roam the compound at night to, as a deterrent to keep the guys inside the camp. We were 26 men to our room, and we were in tiers, bunks along one side of the room in tiers, 4 tiers high. And you would lay foot to head along those shelves. I was in one corner of the room where there were just 3 high. And there were 2, 4, there were 6 guys in that small area. One room, one small stove with a table. That's it. We had to turn that stove into a cooking stove because they had given up on using a mess hall. They had just too many prisoners at that time.
Now you said there was about 18,000 roughly.
Yeah. No.
You said 10 American and 8 British?
No, it was about 10,000 total. 8,000 American, 2,000 British.
Oh, okay.
That's where I was
So
in there.
10,000. I'm just trying to get an idea of size of the facility. Puyallup Fairgrounds. Bigger or smaller?
I think the camp would fit in the fairgrounds.
So about that size.
Yeah.
So that's still quite a few people fenced in
Yes.
barracks in not a huge area.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there were, I wish I had I kept a drawing of the compound. In fact, one of the books I brought has an aerial view of the prison camp. And twice a day, we would be called out into the open, stand out there in rows in front of our barracks for a head count, which would be taken by the prison guards. Of course, we did everything to mess up the count. Changing places, and whatnot. And we would have to go through the count several times. Now, this is in the middle of winter. On the Baltic coast, it was the worst winter in northern Germany in a decade. So the compound commander said, "You guys want to stand out here in this cold? We'll go through the count as many times as we have to until we get it right." Well, after a while, and many of us became frostbitten because of standing out there in the snow. And to this day, I still suffer from frostbite. My hands get extremely cold. My fingers get white if I get cold. So, after a while, you finally realize, well, standing out in the cold isn't the greatest thing. So we didn't always screw up the count, but we would have occasionally, of course, they would also use that period of time to inspect the barracks. They would run in a crew of what we call ferrets, who would inspect the barracks looking for contraband. Because there were some radios in the barracks that were hidden, other things that they were looking for, anything that they could find. They would inspect. They'd run the guards through the barracks looking for things.
Did you ever have any contraband in your barracks that they found?
No. It was pretty well hidden, but they got pretty wise to the ways of the prisoners. And sometimes they'd leave stuff out so they could find them, but that was only rare.
Did you have, were the guards kind of separated from you, or was it the type where you could actually have a conversation with the guards?
No.
Separated?
No. Only during the head count and when they had their inspections were any guards inside the compound. Most of the time they were outside. But you had guard towers on all four corners and in between with machine guns and searchlights for night so that you couldn't get out.
Did you ever think about getting out?
Oh yeah, you always thought about getting out. There are a few people who made it out, but not very long.
What did you do all day?
Well, fortunately, through the Red Cross, they provided some books. But most of the time was walking around the compound, trying to get some exercise. There were some who stayed in the sack all day, because they were advised to, don't do that. Get up, get around. We would call it going around the bend, which was a term for anyone who kind of went off his rocker. We would use the term, well, he's gone around the bend.
So you had some of that? Yeah?
Oh, yes, we had some of that.
Just the stress of the war and prisoner and...
Huh.
And you had, what did you say,
26 men to a room.
Do you remember any of the people that you were in your...
Oh, yes, I remember some of them.
From all over the place? Or?
Yeah. But I belonged to the American ex-prisoners of war. And they published a directory of all of the members of the ex-POWs. I only found one who was in that room with me who also belonged to the ex-prisoners of war. The rest of them I've been unable to find. Some have been lucky to find, roommates. Maury Bauer found a couple of his.
How long were you in?
From, I was captured in November of 43 until we were liberated by the Russians. November of 44, I'm sorry. Until the Russians liberated us in May of 45. So roughly 7 months.
So it sounds like there was a lot of time to pass.
Yes.
What did you guys talk about? Or did you? Or was it quiet? I mean, what was the...
Food. Food. Everybody would recite their favorite restaurant in their hometown. Everybody would write their favorite recipes that they had and talk about that. And that was one of the main topics of conversation was either your hometown or the food that you missed.
So not women.
No, there was no interest in women at that time.
That's interesting because John was younger. He was, a 16-year-old boy, and that's what he said is that all of that because there seems to be a certain biological aspect that would be in there, and physiological and all that. But that was it. He said that within that situation. But the movies and the books always play it up that here were these prisoners and they had they'd gotten a picture of their gal or whatever, and that's all that anybody talked about. And I don't think I've ever seen. Now I have to go back and watch the Stalag movie again, The Greatest Escape, and see. But I don't think the movies ever portrayed people talking about food, recipes, restaurants.
Well, that just happened to be our bunch in our room.
Well, I've heard it from others.
Yeah.
I've heard it from others. I think it's Warren Shizow talks about pancakes and butter and syrup, and that's all he thought about. And to this day, I guess almost every day he has pancakes and butter because he missed it that much. Huh. I wonder if that's because food's comfort or home or...
I think so.
Because I assume the food you had wasn't real good. You said you had to do your own cooking? In your
Yes. We divided ourselves up by taking turns of taking care of the food, cleaning up afterwards, cleaning the rooms, keeping it tidy. Everybody was responsible for their own bunk and keeping it, presentable.
Did they provide you with utensils?
Yes, we got a what I would call a tablespoon.
And you had to create everything else?
Had to create everything else. Guys made pans out of tin cans, taking them apart, melting the solder that was on the seam of the tin cans, taking them open, and then using that solder then to solder up the sides of the pans that we made.
What did you have for food?
Ersatz bread, and had to make sure that everybody got their slice of bread, however thin. And whoever was slicing the bread was watched by everybody, to make sure that it was evenly sliced. We got probably one loaf of bread for each room, each meal. The Red Cross food parcels were very sparse. I mean, they were well filled, but we didn't get too many. Sometimes they would give us enough parcels to split between 4 men. Of course, in our room, we combined all of the parcels together. Other rooms, I understand, people would get a parcel and they would keep the parcel, and then they said, well, this is for 4 men. 4 guys would get together and they would make their own. Another group would make their own. But our room had decided that we would share every parcel as much as we could. Canned milk, sugar, powdered coffee, and there was a lot of trading going on between others. Like we would trade with the British, trade with the Canadians for their Canadian bacon that came in cans, trade with the Scots for their oatmeal. Now this was trading across compounds because the English were in a compound of their own. They were not mixed up with the Americans. But there was enough movement through the area that you could trade. You'd trade cigarettes. Each Red Cross parcel had a large piece of chocolate and it was actually supplied by the GIs, I mean by the government, and that was a favorite trading piece. Was a D bar that they was called. So there was a variety of food that you could get through trading, but it meant, trading cigarettes or candy or something that someone else wanted.
So that was the valuable one, though, that chocolate bar.
Yes, it was.
So that's I never heard that either. I didn't even think about it. Of course, I should have. But the fact that you got your goods from the Red Cross U.S., I assume, and
Yes.
the Canadians got it from whatever there. So that's why you had different food supplies in your.
Yes, yeah.
Huh.
And we were issued either potatoes or rutabagas by the camp beside the bread. That was the only fresh stuff that we got was the potatoes. And sometimes the potatoes were all frozen. They were half black, so you couldn't use it all. But you'd make a potato soup. You'd make rutabagas. They fried them, they baked them, they souped them. They cooked rutabagas any way that you could. And it was a long, long time before I could eat another rutabaga.
That was going to be my next question. Do you like rutabagas today?
Of course, we were served the big rutabagas that they used for cattle food locally. It's not the nice little rutabagas that you get here. These were the great big ones, and when you opened them up, they were all pithy. And so...
Did you get mail?
I never got any mail. There were some of the old-timers who were in our camp did finally get some mail and some food parcels. Some of them got cigarettes, but I'll have to tell you one of the letters I had written home. I was already home when it arrived in the mail. I have it to this day. It was addressed to my parents.
You beat it home.
I beat it home.
Huh.
Of course, by that time, transportation in Germany was pretty sad by that time. They even had trouble getting around because their railroads were all bombed. Their tracks were all bombed. And the only way they'd get out by was by horse and buggy, or their cars that were only used for military.
Did the Germans organize anything within the camp? I mean, activities or anything like that? They basically just gave you a place to sleep and made sure you were there in the night and there in the morning? And then in between, it was all...
That's right. It's like putting a dog in a cage and feeding him twice a day. Other time, you left him alone. No, the prisoners made their own activities as much as they could. In the wintertime, there was very little you could do.
Try to stay warm.
Try to stay warm. You were got your exercise by walking around the inside of the compound.
Well, like you said, you were segregated too. The Brits were over in one place.
Yes.
So when you would do trading of food, did that have to be done on the sly? Or did the guards, whatever you did in the day, as long as you weren't digging a trench, they didn't care? Or?
Well, not quite. There was some, trading on the sly. And whatever we could get from the guards, that we would bribe the guards with cigarettes and whatnot for any equipment that we wanted. Many of the guys in the older compounds got radio parts, got cameras through trading with the guards. They weren't above taking our cigarettes.
So it is true what they say, that everything has a price.
Yes. Yes.
Could you see humanity, again, it sounds like the guards were kind of separated from you, but did you see some guards that you knew stay out of the way of that one, and that guy's okay?
Yeah, we were told about certain people, yes. But as a whole, our contact with the guards was somewhat limited, and many of us, not speaking German, did not choose to strike up an acquaintance.
Now, you ended up in 2 camps? Luft 1, or you were at Luft 1 all the time?
I was at Luft 1 all of the time.
All the time, okay. So that's where you were when liberation occurred?
That's correct, yes.
So what happened then?
Well, the night before the Russians arrived at the camp, all of the guard dogs were put to sleep because they didn't want to release the dogs. They were trained to be guard dogs, and you let them loose and they would attack. So the local constabulary, put them to sleep, shooting them. So one evening we heard all this shooting going on. We found out later that they had gotten rid of the dogs, and then they all disappeared. All the guards left, and there wasn't anyone around. That's when we knew that we would be visited by the Russians. They came in and they wanted to know why we hadn't torn all the fences down. Well, I don't think it occurred to any of us to tear the fences down. We had the gates, we could get out the gates. So there was an American came by in a Jeep, and arrangements were made to get us out of camp by flying us out. We were near a German airfield that had been used as an assembly plant for a jet aircraft, which we found very interesting. I walked into the plant, and here you could see various stages of assembly of this new German jet. They had rolled bombs out on the runway, but we had people who were, especially the English, who were expert in disarming bombs, and so they were rolled off the runway because the 8th Air Force was coming in with airplanes to take us out. In the meantime, we wandered all over the area, and we were cautioned, don't go off on your own, because there are still pockets of resistance by the Germans, and besides that, there were these Russians who nobody really trusted. They used the Mongolian troops as shock troops to come in and terrorize the local, before the regular troops came in, occupying troops came in, so that there would be no trouble. But these Mongolians, they didn't care whether you were American or not.
I hear they were...
Pretty rough.
Yes. Much worse than the Germans.
Yes.
Yeah.
And their method of fishing was to go out in the middle of the bay there, drop a couple of grenades in the water, and then pick the fish up off the top of the water.
A little concussion fishing there.
Yes. Well, the Germans did slaughter a few local cows for us to have fresh meat. But I don't know whether you've tasted freshly slaughtered beef, milk cows. That's what all they had. There was no what we classify as cattle. They're all milk cows. And a few of the boys got sick because their system was not used to eating that freshly slaughtered beef.
How long did it take you to get, once you got out, to get back home? Quite a while?
Yeah, yes. We were flown out of Barth. First they came in with transports to haul the sick out, because there were a number of guys who were ill, who had been injured and hadn't fully recovered. So they brought in what we would call today DC-3s, C-47, C-46, I forget. And they had nurses on board, and the sick and injured were put on these and flown out first. Then they brought in B-17s, and we all climbed aboard those things and sat wherever we could in the airplane to make sure it wasn't overloaded, then flown into Le Havre, France, to a place called Camp Lucky Strike. And there were thousands of us there. And we were told to wait for the next transport to take us by boat back to the States. And that was the longest wait. We were there almost 2 weeks before a ship arrived to take us. In that 2-week period, a lot of boys disappeared to Paris, because anybody in uniform could ride the French railroads for free. So they would go into Le Havre, find out what trains went to Paris, and hop on and spend a few days in Paris. I'm just sorry I didn't. But I was gullible enough to say that, don't leave because there's liable to be a ship here tomorrow. So I didn't make it into Paris.
Were you, was your health pretty good?
I was pretty skinny, that's all.
Yeah. Well, do you know how much you weighed when you left the?
No, I really don't.
I mean, I've talked to people that lost half of they went in at 160 and left at about 80-some pounds,
Yeah.
half their weight.
Yeah.
Wow.
But while we were in camp, we were deloused, given clean uniforms. We were deloused with DDT. They put the thing down your front.
It's making guys undead.
Yes.
I mean, that's.
And the first bread, the white bread we ever got, tasted like cake. And we were advised not to eat too fast or too much, but go easy. Go easy on your stomach. So we would eat several times a day, which was available. Milkshakes and ice cream, things like that. And then finally a ship arrived. It was the troop ship SS Simon Buckner, named after an old Navy admiral, I think. And it was a troop ship. Now the guys who got on first got the best accommodations. They got it into the staterooms. were able to eat in the dining room with linen, tablecloths. The rest of us who didn't get there in fast enough were down in the hole in a troop ship where the bunks were, stacked up. And we had 2 meals a day. That's when we got Navy beans for breakfast. We didn't mind. But the 5-day trip across the ocean, most of us spent on the deck because it was, fresh air. Nobody wanted to stay down in the bottom. And we landed at Newport News, Virginia. at a place called Camp Patrick Henry. And there was, when we got there, we found German prisoners working in the mess hall. And it created quite a furor. And we as prisoners told the commandant of Camp Patrick Henry, we're not going into that mess hall till you get rid of those German prisoners. Because they were in there, you know, waiting tables and eating the food, and were living the life of Riley, so to speak. And unfortunately, one of our guys he observed a German prisoner was working in the garden, in the yard, and he went over and he beat him up, which was not right, but he was just mad enough to do that.
It's interesting because, again, this is that surreal aspect of war. The war ends, we sign the papers, and now we're not enemies anymore.
Yeah.
Did you feel that way? Or, well, I think it's kind of interesting that you got married to the enemy back here, but is that something that war was war and after war is after war, or is there...
Not quite.
Not quite.
No. We were pretty upset because we never got treated like that in Germany. We didn't work in the German mess halls and eat their food, wait on their tables. We were put in a compound, whereas German prisoners were treated very well in this country. Sure, they worked on the farms in eastern Washington. There was a contingent of Italian prisoners in Seattle in a compound down there, and they were treated very well. There was a lot of fraternization going on between the Italian prisoners and some Americans. And I'm sure that there were those who were working the farms here in eastern Washington and in Oregon did, you know, they had pretty much the run of the area. So there was a certain amount of bitterness by the American prisoners to find out and to see what the U.S. was doing, treating German prisoners of war.
Did you hold that bitterness towards people or a government, or, I mean, do you separate the two, or is it just Germans in general?
Yeah.
Germans in general. Yeah, it was. I know a woman just wrote a book called Stalag, Wisconsin, and there was already a good German population there, and the prisoners would, quote, escape for the evening, go into town, have a date, and come back and be in. So I can see where that would, it becomes that thing of fairness.
Yes.
You know, the Geneva Convention, to all those things. So how did you end up marrying a German?
Well, we were both separated and both had children. We joined an organization called Parents Without Partners, PWP, and we met at one of those meetings. And I had 2 children. Elizabeth had 3. And we started dating and going to the dances that were sponsored by PWP. And we got to like each other. And we said, well, heck, let's get married. So we did, because we were both in the same situation, raising children on our own.
Was that ever an issue? Did you discuss here you're bombing the cities and then captured over there.
Yeah.
She was on
No,
the
it
other
was
end
never
of-
never an issue with me, because
No, Alex, I probably shouldn't talk.
it was never an issue.
No.
Uh,
We talked about it, and we were both adult enough to know when that happened 30, 40 years ago. It wasn't anything personal. Why should there be any animosity? This is you and I. And Alex did apologize to me and said, I'm so sorry that I bombed your country. And I thought that was very gracious and very special, really.
I'll have to tell you something very
I'll
ironic.
stir the pot for a second. Did she ever apologize for the treatment the German? No, I'm just.
Well,
No, you went. I know it wasn't.
No, war's heck. War's
Yeah.
hell.
Yeah.
I don't care under what circumstances you're involved in. I mean, war is just pure hell. And but you got to be also, I should say, mature enough and forgiving enough that you say, well, it wasn't our personal conflict that got us there. And you got to be able to forgive, and you got to be able to forget, and you got to be able to make amends and say, "Wow, this is a new start." And we're all different, and you got to be human enough to forget the differences.
And it's 60 years later.
Yeah.
Life goes on. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was a little girl. I mean, I was only 10 years old when the war ended.
Huh.
So, yeah, it was hard. It was hard on us. It was hard on them. I mean, having to go through being incarcerated at age 18, first of all, being shut down or taken prisoner, you're confronted with a totally different country. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You must be frightened to death. You're starved, you're cold, you're lonesome, all these things. I can just imagine what all these guys have had to go through in order to make it through that period. Must have been awful.
I'd imagine.
And, I have a lot of compassion, and I can see how difficult, even so, it was difficult for us, of course. I think it was more difficult probably for the older generation, my parents at that time. My father was fighting the war in Russia. My mother was here with us two children trying to protect us and make things go. And I mean, we were starving too. We didn't have any food. Everything was rationed. And I mean by ration, let's say, like maybe 1 ounce of bread a day, maybe 1 quart of 1% or skim milk a week if you could get it. All your clothing was rationed. Everything was rationed. I mean, minimal amount of food. So it was hard. It was hard for everybody.
Unless you lived on a farm in Germany during the war,
You really starved.
you really starved.
You really starved.
Yeah. Fortunately, those people who lived in the farm could have chickens and ducks out in the backyard. And
But if you lived in a city, there wasn't anything. I still remember one incident, and I was just.
Can I just interrupt for just a
Sure.
second? Well, no. Are you one? Can I interview you for like 15 minutes? I think it's really important because what you're explaining is something that I think people need to understand. We teach a very geo and ethnocentric view of World War II was America, and we went out and we fought it. And there has to be, and we have had a lot of people talk about they were doing our job, we were doing our job. That's what it was, but not from the perspective of you as a child. Again, seeing the juxtaposition here. which I think is real important because again, it even shows more of the absurdity of war.
Yeah, true.
So
You would have to help me though, because I'm not very good talking anyway.
you've seen how I work.
Yeah, but you have to ask more questions.
Okay. Is that okay with you?
Yes.
Okay. Let me get you unmiked and switched here, and we'll wait. Okay.
When Elizabeth's father died, we flew over for the funeral. And as is the custom in Germany, the oldest walks behind the casket to the gravesite. I stood with her and marched behind the casket. He was a retired military. He joined the military. He was in the military during the war.
Professional military.
He was professional. And after the war, he was selected by the U.S. to help form the new, what's it called?
German Army.
The new German Army. And he was with the Mountain Division in Bavaria and retired as a major in the new German Army. Now, I want to show you how ironic it is. We're in the city of Munich, a city that I had dropped bombs on. I'm walking behind the casket of my father-in-law, who was a former German military officer. Now, when I dropped bombs on Germany, I had no idea that I would be back there doing what I was doing. Now, isn't that ironic?
Again, as I said, it becomes even past ironic. It becomes surreal. And
Yeah.
have you ever gone back to?
Oh yes, we've been back 3 times.
Is that right?
Yes.
What's left there? Well, I mean, to the Luftwaffe, to Luftwaffe 1 where you were. Is there anything left?
Nothing left. I haven't been up there. I've talked to people who've been there, and there's a monument there, but outside of that, there's nothing. That's what's happened to all of the prisons in Germany. They're just no longer there. They're converted back to farm country.
Lauren was there. Lawrence Wisha was there.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, Lauren was in the same camp I was in at Luft 1.
Have you ever compared notes? I mean,
To some degree, but
to where
not
you
doing.
could know that you both were you there at the same time?
Yes.
So-
He arrived there before I did, by maybe a month or 2.
Huh. I can't remember if he was the one that, because I've interviewed quite a few. Somebody told a story. They were in a prison camp, and they were getting really hungry, and there was this cat, and they debated, and they were going to do it one night, and they couldn't draw themselves to doing the cat. Well, then it went on, and they decided they were hungry enough for the cat, and they couldn't find the cat. And he said he read this book written by somebody that was in there at the same time, and they were in one of the different barracks, and they got that cat.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
what did you do after the war? Come back and just put it all behind?
I came back to Tacoma. I had been at UPS before I left, and I wanted to finish my college, so I enrolled at the University of Washington and graduated from there in 1950.
GI Bill?
GI Bill, yes. Yeah.
Boy, that GI Bill did amazing things.
Yes. Of course, I also worked part-time. I waited tables in the fraternity house. I scrubbed floors for a group of dentists every night, cleaned them. I worked for Seattle's First National Bank as a money messenger. So I did part-time work while I was going to school.
Was your perspective totally different now as a student that had been away to war, had his life threatened, so to speak? Did you come back a man, so to speak, or?
Oh yeah, the rah-rah hoopla was, just so much stuff. I joined a fraternity because I was asked to, and it was a place to live. And there were an awful lot of ex-GIs in there with me. And we didn't put up with hazing and stuff like that. Especially amongst the boys who had stayed there or were too young to go in the service and had gone to school. There was no hazing at all. We wouldn't put up with it. So there was and we could always go down to the local pub. The Blue Moon was a favorite place.
It's still around, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or the Little Red Hen.
That one I haven't heard of, but the Blue Moon I've heard of.
And the other favorite was the Red Robin, which was alongside the University Bridge. And then there was the library, which was in the Montlake district. So all of us, were older. We were all over 21 by that time. And most of the kids we were going to school were still 17, 18.
But even today, that 3-year difference doesn't seem that big.
Yeah.
But the matter of your life experience, I just imagine that.
A whale of a difference.
Yeah. Huh. From your experience in war, do you think there's a message to be left with the generations to come from World War II?
Oh yes, avoid it as much as you can. I mean, not individually, but making sure that the people who are responsible for running the country understand that that's always the last resort. And I don't mean to say last resort is to capitulate. You have to stand up for not only your rights, but what you believe in. And if war is the only solution, so be it.
It's interesting. I'm just reading We Were Soldiers, the Vietnam book.
Yes.
And it gives both perspectives in it. And you hear the North Vietnamese telling their troops, talking about the one thing that you do not want to lose is your freedom and your rights. And again, there's that juxtaposition where we get so Americanized that we're fighting for our freedom.
Yeah.
Our rights, that's the only way. And I mean, we're so lucky the country we live in,
Yes.
the freedoms we have, but ours is not the only way for the world to.
Oh no, no.
But we get stuck that way sometimes.
Yes.